discovered her mom through using alcohol. And later, she kind of more admitted to that. But one of the things she said is when I said, well, hey, your mom is really worried about you because she thinks you're really coping through drinking. And she was like, my mom drinks, I can't remember how much was, but every night. So I don't know what she's talking about. So again, we had that sort of mom modeling that coping and then daughter kind of picking up on that along the way. So that's just, that's a little bit scary, but just a good reminder to all of us. And I think, another point on that is when you're coping positively, like let's say there's a lot of traffic, you're stressed, you're trying to drive to get somewhere, get to practice, whatever, saying, oh my gosh, I'm feeling a little stressed because this traffic is so bad and we're having trouble getting there on time. I'm going to take some deep breaths, and saying that out loud to your kids, that's really good because then they're picking up on it. So a lot of times one of the things I'll work on with parents in my office is, hey, if you're doing some really good things, like you're exercising, you're taking deep breaths, maybe you have an app you use to kind of help with mindfulness, talk to your kids about that. Tell them about how you're using that. Sometimes making it more overt what you're doing to manage your stress is super helpful. And then remember, you can't out-reason anxiety. Telling someone their anxiety is not valid never helps. So that, what that kind of looks like is, oh, you shouldn't be worried about that. Oh, well, you shouldn't be worried about that. Why are you worried about germs? That's really silly. You don't need to worry about that. That just really doesn't ever work. Anxiety is sort of by nature a little bit nonsensical. And so the person oftentimes, maybe even a kiddo, has some understanding that it's illogical. Oh, good. I just had Katie just said, I love the reminder to say out loud what we are doing to manage anxiety in a positive way. Yes, I love that one too. I need to do a better job of that myself at home. But anyways, the kind of the idea is that anxiety isn't super illogical. So telling someone it doesn't make any sense, a lot of times they know, hey, I know it doesn't make any sense, but I'm having physical feelings of feeling anxious. So that doesn't really help me to just hear it doesn't make any sense. Okay, any other comments? I love those, or questions. Let's keep those coming. I'll also go into some frequently asked questions. Sometimes that's helpful too. Oh, I've got a question here. Okay, Kristen's got a question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you were talking about validating their fears, baby's crying. When you were talking about that, that feels like something that is so ingrained in me sometimes. Do you have any tips about, or not doing that? Do you see that? Like, I'm doing the opposite of what you said, where I try to tell them, like, oh no, that's not real. You're imagining this, or you know what I'm saying? How can I stop doing that other than just obviously like practicing that? Do you have any tips of how to, do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do, and I think I've got it. So I think there's kind of a two-stepper to that one. What I would do is just encourage, to say, like, I know this feels scary right now. What could you tell yourself to kind of help yourself feel better? So get them to like kind of say, oh, this is what I can tell myself. So instead of you doing the reassuring, have them learn how to reassure themselves. The problem in an anxiety disorder specifically is that kids will often seek reassurance from their parents, but there's never really enough reassurance to reassure that anxiety. The person has to learn how to do that on their own. So you can kind of join them in, I know this seems scary or hard. What do you think you could tell yourself? What could help? So validate first, and then you can kind of get into like what they could do to help themselves. I think that would be good versus, kind of arguing with them about how it's not really that bad. What I will tell you is this kind of parenting takes a lot of mindfulness and it takes a lot of patience. And so it's really hard. So when I talk to people about that, I say, hey, this is a really hard way to parent because life is busy and life is crazy. And this requires like a lot of like slowing down and thinking in the moment. So does that help, Kristen?
Yes, that's awesome. That's great.
Good. Well, we're going to talk a little bit now and keep any questions or comments coming. We're going to talk a little bit now about when to be concerned. This is the question I probably get most from parents is, Okay, when should I be worried, right, about the worries? Which is really, it's a great question. Because we're always kind of asking, like, hey, what's sort of like a phase a child's going through? Because kids go through phases, right? Like they might be afraid of the toilet for a little bit and then that noise doesn't bother them anymore. Or, they might be a little bit afraid of the school year starting or going to kindergarten. Those things are all pretty normal fears. But what parents really want to know is like, hey, okay, when is it going from normal to something that seems more intrusive? And so what we talk about is, some worries are normal, but sometimes they can turn into more intrusive symptoms that can interfere with a child's development. So that's one of the reasons why, to seek out help is because when kids are dealing with things like an anxiety disorder, depression, kind of other mental health things, what can happen is they get off their developmental course. And we don't like to see that because then they're not doing normal things like going to birthday parties, going to sporting events, like they're getting off, and then that means there's long-term consequences. We want to keep them on their developmental course. So just like when you check in with your pediatrician, they're making sure medically they're on their developmental course. We kind of want to make sure socially and emotionally they're on their developmental course. So that's really important. So here's some, I like this little chart here. So here are kind of 6 things that are good to kind of keep track of. So if you see them where they're continuing to avoid things. So I was talking to a family and, their son wouldn't play soccer anymore. So he wouldn't play soccer with his friends. All the friends were playing. He wouldn't. He was too nervous to be out there on the field. So that avoidance, not wanting to go to school, not wanting to go to birthday parties, not wanting to maybe even like visit with extended family. A decrease in grades. So in elementary school, obviously, this is not quite as obvious, but later on down the road, a decrease in grades or just worse school performance. Because a lot of times they're sitting in class and they're just like worried about what's going on. So they're not really paying attention to what's happening at school or what they're teaching. They're really a significant distress. They just talk about feeling worried. They tend to worry about lots of different things. That distress, they're not really able to help themselves calm down. A lot of parents will say, we spend, a lot of time just trying to help them calm down. Changes in appetite. So with anxiety, because sometimes that can cause stomach problems. Then sometimes they're not eating as much, or they eat and their stomach feels really upset. And, sometimes, not to be gross, but sometimes people, kids and adults, they'll have trouble with like diarrhea or constipation because of anxiety. If they're having trouble falling asleep. So in kids, usually what I see is I don't see kids as much that, wake up during the middle of the night and can't go back to sleep. I hear about that a lot with adult anxiety. A lot of times they just take a really long time to go to sleep. So 30, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. And when you talk to them about why they can't go to sleep, they're like, well, I'm just like thinking about all these things and I'm worried about things going on. They can be like very tense and restless. Just their body has trouble settling down. And then persistent or disturbing worries, so they're verbalizing worries. To you, some kids are not verbalizing worries as much as you can kind of look at them and you can just tell that their mind is kind of going. Sleep. So a lot of times, these kids too, with anxiety, sometimes they can have like night terrors, and things like that. So that can be kind of associated with that. So those are just some kind of key warning signs. What we look at is kind of a cluster of these things. So sometimes if there's one of these, we kind of go, okay, let's watch it. But then once we start to have more and more and we see it over time, it's been 6 months, it hasn't gotten better, 7 months, 8 months. The thing I think that's really important for parents is what I see happen a lot is sometimes parents wait to talk about it with their pediatrician or maybe make an appointment to see somebody like me. And it's because they feel like somehow they have like caused the anxiety. They have a lot of like, I'm doing a really bad job as a parent, so a lot of shame about their parenting. And so it actually tends to be a barrier to getting their kids help. And so the line that I always give parents is, good parents do what kids need. So, you know, if your child needs to go to the eye doctor because they might need glasses, then you make an eye doctor appointment, right? If they need a math tutor, you get a math tutor. If they've got dyslexia, you do the dyslexia intervention program at school. So if they're having trouble with anxiety or other kind of mental health things or ADHD, you get them the help they need in the same way. It's the same thing, although it feels different to us. Excuse me. It's the same thing, although it feels different. So the reason why is untreated anxiety can really cause long-term problems for kids. So higher risk of poor school performance, missing important social experiences, developing, you know, they can develop eating disorders or engage in substance use or abuse. So one of the things that I see a lot of is untreated anxiety in like high school boys. I see a lot of substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, and all those things are pretty easy to get to. So that's a lot of times how they're managing their anxiety. Treated anxiety, research indicates that anxiety is very treatable. We actually teach kids specific skills and tools, so it's not just talking. We teach them coping strategies. We teach them different ways to think about things. So anxiety is very treatable, and then children really experience a great reduction in symptoms, and then that's great. They're on their developmental course, like we talked about, which is so important. Okay, so any other questions right now before I keep going? Or comments? I liked the comment we had too.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So one thing that I, constantly struggle with my daughter, I have a 6-year-old, is that she's very shy, and I have a really hard time sometimes. Like, I know the cues to watch out for when something's wrong, and I kind of have to ask questions for her to share her feelings. And I mistakenly, early when she was younger, I was like, oh, are you being shy? And I feel like I did so wrong saying that, because now, like, if we're at a party, she doesn't want to play or something like that, she's like, oh, I'm just being shy. And so now she's associating herself with, like, the word shy. How do you have any tips of, like, breaking out of that, or, like, what to tell her in situations where, like, she doesn't want to go play because she says she's being shy, or she doesn't, want to, like, talk to someone because she's being shy. Like, I'm just having a hard time, like, breaking out of that, and it was mostly my fault that I kind of told her that early on.
Well, I don't think exactly, because I think she was exhibiting the behavior, right? And you kind of just put some words to it. What you might say is kind of change your wording a little bit and go, you know what, I realize that maybe shy isn't the right word. It just takes you a minute to warm up, and you kind of like to, like, observe and warm up to things, and then you do them. And then I just praise her when she does them, and that's what it kind of sounds like to me, that she's just one of those kiddos that kind of takes it all in before she engages. And that's okay. Some kids, dive right in, and that's their personality. My little one is more like, she'll kind of be an observer, and then she'll kind of jump in. And we have a little friend, and the little friend is just like ready to talk and go and, hi, how are you? And so some of that is personality. So I would just say, I would use your wording a little bit differently and just say, hey, you know what, you just need a little warm up, and then you get right in there. And then I give her examples of how she's done that before. And you could even prep her that, hey, we're going to go here, and you might need to warm up a little bit, but then I bet you'll just be playing with everybody and you'll have a great time. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, it helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of this, a lot of parenting is about wording, how we say things to kids, because obviously, right, we're naming it and we're helping them understand themselves and other people. And so a lot of times when we can just make little changes to our wording, it makes a really big deal.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. And then you kind of touched on it with what you said. The question that every parent asks is no, you did not cause nor can you prevent your child's anxiety. Anxiety disorders, when it's a disorder, develops from a wide set of risk factors like genetics, personality, life experience, and brain chemistry. So I talk to parents a lot about that because a lot of times we really just want to blame ourselves and we must be like the worst parent ever and this is why this is happening. I even have people, when I explain this, say, well, it's my genes, I'm the anxious one. And I'm like, well, but you got them from somewhere, right? Like usually we can go back in the family tree and it goes back like a lot of generations, even if we didn't know what to call it at the time. So you didn't cause it, and that's really important, right? Because if we think we caused it as a parent, then a lot of times we that shame comes up, and then we don't get them the help we need. And we, and it's just I talk to parents again about this. I'm going to say it again. Good parents get kids what they need, and so this is getting help from somebody like me is really, it doesn't feel the same way, but it really is just like getting a math tutor or going to the eye doctor, right? Same thing. And then I like this, we've got this little quote here on the slides that you guys probably can't see, but behind every great kid is a parent who's pretty sure they're screwing it all up. And I, even today, y'all will appreciate this. I was texting with a friend, one of my friends actually lives in London, and it's been really fun because while I just had twins last week, so I've had this little bit of time where I can text people during the day and stuff, which is not my normal when I'm at work. And she was texting me about her kiddo, just sure she had messed everything up and she was the worst parent in the world. And, we all feel that way. I think that's a common experience of like, we all feel like we kind of don't know what we're doing and we hope we're doing it right. So just to kind of normalize that feeling. And then just some of the things that can help coping skills for anxiety. A lot of these things are things that we teach parents about in our office, but deep breathing is a great one. And I know people are like, oh, breathing, but it really slows our body down and really helps our nervous system calm down. It does the same thing in kids. And it helps us think more clearly. So that it's such a great one. And what I love about deep breathing, when people actually will do it and see that it works, is that you can do it anywhere. Like you don't have to have oh, I've got to have this with me to be able to do it. So I love teaching it to kids because they can do it at school, they can do it at recess, they can, do it when they're having conflict with a friend. The other thing that's really important is activity. So we know for adults, we would say exercise. We'd say 45 minutes of exercise, 4+ days a week. You get a really great benefit. It's almost like taking a low dose of an anti-anxiety medicine. For kids, they don't necessarily we don't put them on a treadmill, but we've got research that says even if they play 30 minutes on the playground, so maybe they play, when you go to pick them up from school, or maybe they're in aftercare, they get to play on that playground. That's really great for them. And that it's not an organized activity like soccer or baseball, because those things, again, right, those can create some performance anxieties. But just being able to play on the playground for those elementary school aged kids are really good. And then for your teenagers, if some of you guys have teenagers, can be really hard because teenagers can kind of really resist doing things that are good for them, shockingly. And so, helping them get in a sport or finding something they do where they're getting activity is really important. And then another thing is humor. Humor can really help all of us cope with things, whether it's like watching a funny video or making something silly. That's all really, really important and helpful in anxiety. And those are just really kind of easy things that anybody can, start to work on with their kiddos. I'm going to go over some resources, and I'll just try to highlight what they're best for. So You and Your Anxious Child, Free Your Child from Worries and Fears. That's Albano is the author of that. That's more if your child has an anxiety disorder, they've been diagnosed with that. That book's really helpful. There's a great general parenting book on just how to validate kids. It's How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. That's by Faber. It is an old book, y'all. It was written in the 80s. It is an oldie but a goodie. I love it. It even gives you some kind of language. They have little comic strips where a parent is saying something to a child and it kind of gives you some good responses. And they actually have a preschool version too, so that's great. And then if you if you've got teenage girls, a great book is Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood by Lisa D'Amour. That's a great book. It's not just about anxiety, but it does talk about that quite a bit. Another one, How to Raise an Adult, Breaking Free of the Over-Parenting Trap and Preparing Your Kids for Success. I love this book. I could not speak more highly of it. A lot of times parents wait to read it until their child is in high school, but it's actually more of a parenting philosophy that I think is like good. Honestly, I'd tell somebody to read it before they had a child. In fact, one of my brothers just had a baby, and I was like, you need to read this book, like, before. So it's really great. And then another one, just general, Owner's Manual for Driving Your Adolescent Brain. It's a great book. Bubblegum Brain, that's for younger kids. That's really helpful. And then Boundaries is always by Cloud and Townsend. They have a whole series on lots of different types of boundaries, but boundaries with kids, boundaries with teenagers, that's really helpful. And then we've got a few more minutes, so I'd love to take any questions people have. And then we can just kind of do a little wrap up here, because I know you guys have a lot going on tonight. I can go over some commonly asked questions too when I talk about this, if I don't have any. One question that comes up a lot is anxiety versus ADHD. So a lot of times kids with anxiety get misdiagnosed with ADHD because with anxiety disorders, one of the criteria is actually inattentiveness. That's because they're worrying. So a lot of times, that is, a question I get a lot. So there can be a lot of comorbidity or meaning just that you can have both anxiety and ADHD, but sometimes kids can get diagnosed incorrectly. So it's really important that you talk to some type of professional to make sure that, because the way you treat those things is really different. So that's why it's so important. Another question I get is, okay, what if I'm not sure I need to talk to like a psychologist like you? What if I'm just not quite sure that that's what we need to do, and I don't want to be, I don't want to kind of do too much? I think that's a great question. So your pediatrician is really a great person to talk to. If you've got a really good pediatrician, they, understand child development, and they understand what's kind of normal, what's abnormal. And we get a lot of times people end up in our office because they're like, oh, I talked to my pediatrician and they really wanted me to come talk to you. The other thing is if you're not sure, we meet with parents and do parent consultations. I'm sure other practices do too, where sometimes we kind of talk, we meet with people and we're like, yeah, I don't think this is like something maybe that needs to be treated right now. Here's some tips and here's some things to watch for. And that can be helpful too, but your pediatrician's a great place to start. Other questions at all?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
What if you did have a misdiagnosis and you just don't know? Like in terms of like ADHD versus anxiety. So you see the anxiety has worn off and things are going better, and you are treating for ADHD, but let's say it was potentially misdiagnosed. Do you think like a second opinion is
what I would do if it were me, this is, if it were me, and obviously I've got my psychologist hat on, is I would do comprehensive testing with a psychologist, because other people do testing like diagnosticians, and that's great, but they don't look at social emotional. So a psychologist does, and so, or a psychologist or a neuropsychologist, and so they can kind of look at, hey, is this really anxiety? Is this really ADHD? Because that comprehensive testing helps like really kind of what's going on, and sometimes what's driving what. So some kids with ADHD have anxiety more because they've got this unmanaged ADHD. They're losing their stuff. They're forgetting things. They can't keep track of schoolwork, and so they're getting anxious because of that. So once you treat the ADHD, they don't really actually have that much anxiety once the ADHD is treated. So if I were kind of questioning like, oh, what's really going on, I would definitely do the comprehensive testing. Now, it is expensive, but I think it gives you really want clarity, because if you're giving somebody a stimulant, or an ADHD medication, that's a pretty big medication to give somebody, and there's lots of different side effects. And if they're anxious, it can make them more anxious. So you just, if you're going to do medication, I think that's pretty important. Or if you're trying to figure out, what do we do to help you? I feel like we've tried this, we've tried that, and we're just not really sure of what's best. The testing really helps clarify, like, these are the things you need to be doing to be helpful.
And is that testing different than what you get at the pediatrician's?
Yes, so this is done. Depending on, I know some pediatricians have some diagnosticians that do some testing. They usually don't look into anxiety as much. So like I said, you'd probably go to a psychologist for this testing. Usually don't. The school district will do like learning disability testing. They don't test for ADHD in the schools. They say, hey, that's a medical thing. That's just the way the schools work. And so you would go to a private psychologist to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was a great question. Any other questions while you guys have me for a few more minutes?
I have one quick question. And I apologize. I missed the first few minutes. So if you went over this, I apologize. But just, my oldest, is definitely my shyest. I wouldn't say he's overly shy, but he tends to be more of I'm going to observe for a minute. But it does seem to be a little bit that he kind of picks and chooses. And so sometimes he's really ready to go and he wants to interact and play. And then sometimes he is more shy, I would say at the beginning. And so what would you say is the balance of, being understanding and being nurturing to him in those moments, but also kind of encouraging him to, step out of his comfort zone and meet new friends? What's a good balance there?
I think maybe I feel like sometimes in the moment when they're a little bit anxious, then if you try to push in the moment and they're already kind of anxious, it can kind of, it can not go as well. And so you may kind of prep, especially if it's a situation where like, okay, his pattern is, if this and this friend is there, then he's really okay because he knows them really well, he feels really comfortable. But if it's going to be newer people, or these two, kiddos that he or she really likes aren't going to be there, so he's going to be less comfortable, you kind of prep before, to kind of say, hey, we're going to go do this, and I think it's going to be great because you're going to get to see so-and-so and so-and-so, and then kind of help go, hey, if you need to warm up, that's okay, but I know you're going to have a lot of fun playing with them later. I think that's kind of what you want them to do. So you don't want to sort of over empathize and then be like, well, you don't have to do any of this, because really you want them to get comfortable and then go and socialize. That's really important. Yeah. Does that help?
Yes. No, that definitely helps. And, I don't know if I heard you correctly, but I think you said you had twins last week.
Yes.
And so, that's amazing. And you're Superwoman, and congratulations.
Oh, well, thanks. No, I told Lori, she was like, hey, are you sure you can still do this? And I was like, well, actually, I was like, I love talking about this, and the babies are in the NICU, and I can't really, there's only a certain amount I can do to help them. So I'm, glad to be able to do this tonight with you guys.
Well, we are so appreciative, and we'll be praying for those babies.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And did I see that there was maybe one more question?
Yes, I had a question.
Okay.
I have a kinder kiddo who has a little bit, and we call it separation anxiety, but now it's almost, since school has started, it's kind of turned into almost a game of sorts, because when I do drop off, he's a mess. Does drop off, he's more controlled. And it depends on the day. Usually on a Friday, it's like he's totally cool because he knows it's a Friday. But just that initial anxiety of getting out of the car and going, walking in those doors. Do you have any tips on how to calm him down? He's my anxious kiddo. We never done a consult. I'm actually on a wait list for Sparrow House to do a consult.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, hopefully
you're fine. So I just didn't know if you had any tips, because we're just not sure if we need actual counseling, or if at this point it's turned into almost like a power struggle at this point.
Yeah, because so it's happening in a power struggle with when there's anxiety is a lot of times kids want to control because that's their way of coping with the anxiety is if they can have the control, which is why there's the power struggle.
Yeah.
Now, because I know there's different things because of COVID, do y'all normally, like, does he just get out of the car or do you walk him up to the school or how does it work?
So when the school year first started, he was fine getting out of the car, jumping out, doing carpool line, no problem. Brother had a like horrific femur break, and my youngest witnessed it, and we think ever since that point that kind of kind of stirred him up. So he was on a wheelchair for a while. He's totally fine now, walking and fine, the older brother, but now it's like we thought that's what it was at first. He was just kind of dealing with that trauma, but now it's kind of turned back into control.
Yeah, so one of the things you can do to kind of test it out, and this may not work, is you have set up a little reward system. So like if he gets out of the car and walks.
Yeah, we do that. We have a little chart.
That's
and
great.
He gets to put the sticker on, and at the end of the week, if he gets all those stickers, he gets his choice of a reward.
But he may, because he's little, that may be too long. Like it may not.
It is. It's like 5 days.
Yeah. So you might try to do like a reward like after
Tiny.
school. Yeah, something small and something after school, and it doesn't have to be like a thing. It can be like extra playtime with you or something like that.
Yeah.
That kind of lets you know is there like if he's more motivated, can he do it? Or is he just too anxious, like that separation anxiety, like you're talking about? He's just too anxious that even with a reward, he's like, I don't care. This is too much.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps tease that out a little bit. So I would just make that reward just a little bit sooner. If he was an older kid, the end of the week, right? With littles, we always try to do kind of like as soon as, kind of as soon as and after. And have him kind of make a reward menu with you of different things that he might like.
Okay.
Switch up the rewards. They get bored with the same thing and then they won't do it anymore.
Right.
So I think that might be, a little helpful. In separation anxiety, just so y'all know, in little kids, that's really common in preschool, kindergarten, first, second grade. And then sometimes that turns into more generalized anxiety. So that's kind of good to know that that's how it can look.
Okay. Okay.
Well, that was a good question.
Another question about that, if he has a good day, like say because he'll go like a week or so, and everything's fine, and then he kind of has a bad day. If he keeps having good days, do we kind of just, I don't want to say ignore it, like praise him that he did, oh, I'm so glad you got out of the car today, and it seems like you had a fun morning. Or like, do we ignore, like, do we just kind of move on? Like, I don't want to draw too much attention to it because I don't know if it's a game.
I don't think so. It doesn't sound that way. I think I would definitely keep praising it. And what I would say is that anxiety kind of, it goes up and down, up and down. So you can have like a really good week, and that's usually the week you got in to see us at our office. This is what happens a lot. And you feel like, we took the car to the mechanic and now everything's fine. With anxiety, it'll kind of go up and go down and go up. And down. So a lot of times what people tell me is like, well, we'll have 2 or 3 good weeks, but then we have a really terrible week. And that's because the anxiety was higher for whatever reason. And in little kids, it's hard to know like why the anxiety was higher exactly. But we all know as adults that sometimes our anxiety goes up and down and up and down. And this is kind of just bigger peaks and valleys. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I want to respect everybody's time. So it is 6:30. So I'm going to let y'all go, but, thank you so much for coming tonight. I hope it was helpful. I hope we got some of it recorded so people couldn't be here can listen to it. We've got some resources on our website. We're getting ready to redo our website, so hopefully we'll have more resources for parents. We've got an Instagram where, we have some parent resources there. We haven't done as much of that lately, but we're hoping to get back to that. But anyways, if there's any way we can be helpful, we definitely want to do that. And I thank you all so much for your time tonight. It was so great to be here with you guys. Take care and have a good night.